So today we are live right now. So we'll be discussing our topic. The topic is productivity. We'll be discussing the topic productivity in the light of thought leadership. So today means today Mr. Abid Majumdar is with us. He is the director and the founder of organization that is the Idea Factory. So today we'll be discussing the topic. So let's move on with the topic. So my first question is that what is the productivity means what do we understand productivity in a very layman's term? What is productivity basically?
Thank you, Mr. Mukherjee, for this platform. First of all, my best Dasera greetings to my viewers who have been watching this show for the last few sessions. Uh, Coming back to the program, today we are going to discuss thought leadership and productivity and how they are connected to each other. And essentially, productivity, if we ask, it's a very old term, and we have all studied in our colleges about productivity as a measure of output, which means that productivity for a layman is essentially a measure of efficiency or a measure of output vis-a-vis the input, which means it shows the quality of work done by an individual or an organization or a or even the economy as such. So productivity is very broad term and has been coming from the very industrial. It's largely an industrial term and mostly applied to factories and that which involves the labor. But at the same time, today we have to also adapt it to a services organization as well. Essentially, productivity means output by input, and essentially it is measured in terms of rupees or dollars per hour, which means the productivity of an economy is say dollar 15 per hour, which is a measure of the labor productivity. That means per capita income is dollar 15 per hour. Similarly, if you are talking of a factory, it could be something like the productivity of the factory is dollar 15,000 per hour. So, which means the number of hours spent is an important measure in the denominator, and you measure it in terms of monetary terms. So, the productivity is measured for an economy, for an industry, for an organization, for a team, or for an individual, and is a quality or is a measure of efficiency of the unit. Okay, so higher the productivity, better is the efficiency of the unit, which means that your output is higher vis-a-vis the input that we are giving. So this,
Exactly.
in a sense, this in a sense is what productivity we mean in a very very crude or a very superficial terms.
Yes, definitely the productivity needs to be measured because we know that if we cannot actually measure the productivity in a right way, the organization cannot grow. Basically, they cannot grow in long term because the productivity, when we count the productivity, has to be counted in a very smaller way and also to be integrated with the every part of the organization. That is how because some parts we neglect the productivity, we do not consider, and some parts we are too much means focused in counting the productivity. This kind of the imbalance we have seen in the lots of the organization. So that is the main thing that we are discussing the productivity. Though it's a kind of the term that everybody uses, but the problem is that we do not actually harp into this kind of the things in a such a way that it should be done. Basically, the thought leadership that we are actually discussing in our session means various topics in light of the thought leadership. So today's the topic also that productivity will be actually discussing in the light of the thought leadership. Now, the next question is that thought leadership is a concept that needs to be developed in every organization. So, means how can you correlate the thought leadership and the productivity? Means what kind of the thinking should be that? What kind of the philosophies need to be actually cultivated in the organization? Means means for the kind of the thought leadership concept, so that we can actually measure and increase the productivity in a right. Just if you can throw some light on
Right. Let me continue the discussion from the last discussion, which means that we are measuring productivity of economies and organizations, but it has gone through a sea change. In fact, we definitely need to measure the efficiency of people, but mostly there are large number of service organizations that have come into the play. There are telecom organizations, there are IT organizations, etc., where the traditional term of productivity have to be adapted or adjusted to reflect the current situation. Because when productivity word was used, it was used more from the industrial point of view. Okay, so here we are mostly in the service organization. We use a term called KPI or key performance indices, which are essentially the top level measurements, and then they are drilled down into departmental measurements, and then they are drilled down to the individual measurements. So KPIs are a more current terminology as they reflect productivity in service organizations as well. My experience has been mostly in service organizations, and so KPI is a term that we have related to much more closely than the term productivity. Having said that, KPI is a while we measure that, there are a lot many parameters in organizations today, especially when we have become digital, and there are so many data centric data points that an organization can capture today. There are thousands of data that are actually in the hands of the organization, starting from the internal, performances vis-a-vis even the customer performances. Even today, they even take data points from outside. Okay, because and so big data and analytics are terminologies that have come today. So today it is much more refined and much more developed than when we use the term vis-a-vis the productivity that we talk about. Okay, so the digitization of the economy, as well as all the dashboards are available today. So a lot of measurements are available. Having said that, KPI are actually the priority measurements. So we have to prioritize a lot of data points from the hundreds of data points that we measure in an organization. We prioritize about three to five measurements that we want to see on the top level of the organization. And similarly, that is being scaled down to departments. So even each department measures five parameters, and then also to individuals, each individual measures five parameters. So put together, it's like an scaled down model of measurement, where productivity KPI are all measured on a monthly basis and then on a quarterly basis. Some measurements are even daily basis. And there are some organizations like in telecom, lot of dashboards are they observe daily. Based on that daily ups and downs, they go to the monthly figure, weekly figure. From the weekly, they go into the monthly figure, and from the monthly, they go to the quarterly figure. Having
it.
said that,
It has to be because it has to be that when you are releasing the dashboard, basically if the dashboard, if I said that the dashboard for the internal means for the people within the organization means internal dashboard. So it needs to be actually published daily because the people who are involved in various activities in the organization, they need to know daily where they stand, and that's a kind of the thing. It's a very encouraging factor as well as well as for them, because if they know where they're lacking and where they are standing on day-to-day basis, the appreciation also becomes easy for them to come from the top level of the management. So that is the one kind of the thing I think that the dashboard, when some organization releasing the dashboard is taken as a KPI tool, key performance indicator tool, to measure the performance and also measure the productivity. It needs to be done on a daily basis and then convert into the weekly or fortnightly or in a month or quarter, and then make it in a year. So this kind of the practice is done in some organization, but as far as that, we are dealing basically with the SME, small and medium enterprises, because I am also in consulting and coaching in the small SME, and you and your organization, the idea factory, basically that is also in the consulting business for the small and medium enterprise SME. So why do you think that means what kind of the steps needs to be taken SME? first two things: how do they can develop the thought leadership process in their organization to increase the productivity, and second, what kind of the steps needs to be taken to measure the productivity in a company. These are the two things just I immensely want to know.
Right. I think, first of all, from the thought leadership point of view, that the organizations, as I told you, are buzzing with data points. Okay, and most of them, a lot of it is automated, so a lot of it is readily, available to them without putting the manpower. But that has not happened in a day. I remember during our times, we had to do a lot of daily reporting, and today all those daily reports have been automated. Okay, so, if you're looking at how thought leadership can influence the measurement process, first of all, we are trying to push, first of all, these KPIs have to be dynamic, which means that you have to keep on revising or revisiting or debating or discussing these measurements so that it changes over time. Okay, that doesn't mean the KPIs will change every month or whatever, but I would definitely say every 6 months if you revise, maybe in the next year, every next year there might be some changes in the KPI. So the KPI model can evolve into a more current, developed, discussed, debated. So it's kind of a yearly revision that you can improve. So that is one dynamic element of thought that we want to bring in the thought leadership process, because I remember we had there were a lot of discussions, but the measurements were largely static. It moved from year to year. They never People never had time or bandwidth to discuss all these parameters over a period of time. So that is one element that we want to bring in. Also, the creativity and the original thought process or thinking process that we are actually triggering in the industry or organization, that has to be captured in a quantitative way, which is quite difficult because it is very qualitative. New ideas, new suggestions, and how they translate into the financial part of it is definitely not an easy task. But when we are on a thought leadership journey, we will have to capture how new ideas can be translated into successful projects and how they can be measured, and also to encourage people to bring in more thoughts and ideas. We also have to keep a in place and incentivize the whole process so that more and more people can bring in more thoughts in the process. Thirdly, I think we all have seen there's a lot of work that needs to be, measured, which often we don't measure. For example, I'll give you an example. I worked in the strategy department of organizations, and strategy could never be measured. I mean, the problem with strategy, it is such structured, distributed, diffuse. You cannot put a measurement into the how much value a strategy guy adds in the organization, in spite of the fact that it is being handled by the MD. It has to be handled by the CXOs. Yet it could never be measured. It was always considered as a cost center, and it could never be measured. Okay. So here we are propagating that we can measure such cost centers, or even say there are other data centers. For example, in the business planning and analysis team, which was a financial team, which is largely a cost center, not the revenue facing department, they also have to be measured in terms of how much value they add to the organization. So, going back to the original concept of value chain analysis of Michael Porter, I think as organizations, we are yet to drill it down as a value chain across the organization, which means that how the value, or you say the profitability, in terms of value, of course, we talk of the profitability. How can the profitability be broken down into departments, into individuals? And if you ask, every individual should know how much the profitability he's adding to the organization in terms of thoughts, in terms of actions, in terms of execution. So I see this whole measurement will might go a huge paradigm change if we bring this thought leadership concept over the whole process, and also value chain analysis if we integrate within the whole process. I think Michael Porter's value chain is largely unutilized. That tool is still very unutilized, and we whenever we talk of that, we talk at the very top level and stop there. But the tool is so powerful. If you can break it down, bring it down to the organization level, and put the profitability on that map, superimpose the profitability on the map, we will see that it's a humongous task to bring it down to the strategy team, to the finance team, to the marketing team, all the non-core or the non-revenue facing or back-end activities which cannot be measured directly. So that is one element. Also, there are so many measurements that you can put in. For example, meetings, or the trainings. Like whenever the top management puts in so much of time and energy into meetings, but can you value or put a value to the meetings? So what value is the meeting adding to the organization? Because top management, they are mostly into meetings. I mean, they are mostly talking all the time. So how much value does it add to the organization? Can you measure that? Is the
That is,
salary a
that is, that,
reflection of those
yeah.
meetings?
Just I want to say one point here because there are the kind of studies that just made earlier. So I can remember a part of it. The thing is that what kind of the meetings is done in the organization means 90% of those means time of those meetings are totally waste of the time. Means because that is not actually getting any kind of the result. 90% time is being wasted when the top management is actually doing the meeting all the time. So that was a slightly kind of the thing it was done. That but the thing is that when you are actually making a strategy, the strategy also needs to be measured. It has to have some kind of the output. So that kind of the system needs to be installed in the organization. And if you say that in terms of the thought leadership, so thought leadership I think is a pillar. That pillar needs to be installed in the organization so we can improve the concept of this kind of the concept like that productivity or the performance and how we can measure it in a proper way and increase it in the right. I mean, increase also measure it and also increase it for the future benefit. So my question is that what kind of a suggestion do you give to the small and medium enterprises to install the thought leadership in their organization and increase the productivity?
I think what typically we must, a small and what a big organization can do, a small organization cannot afford to do, which means that it is very important to have a small organization which is largely a smaller team, but the stakes are very high. So what we recommend to them, first of all, we have to bring in the originality of thoughts and ideas into the table. So people have to be incentivized as to bring in innovative thoughts on the table, and it is not the responsibility of the founder and the entrepreneur only. Okay, it is a skill set that every individual has, and it's a skill set that has to be utilized by the organization. So that is one part of it. Secondly, we also have to, as we write, it's easier to map the value chain analysis in a SME rather than in a large organization, because you have a small organization. But then, if you can map the value chain of each individual in this organization, each individual will be very interested to know how much value they add to the organization in case they are not in the revenue facing role. Because the revenue facing, as we have told you in the first discussion or the second discussion, that it's a relay race. You cannot undermine the other guys, because the guy who finishes the race, if he takes away all the credit, it is, you cannot undermine the other players in the whole organization. So put together, I think SME, it's an easier way to handle the value chain analysis. Also, there also has to be an incentive to be high productive, or you talk of KPI. So if you can convert all the KPIs into revenue terms, and you can see how much revenue the individual brings to the table in the organization over a period of 6 months or 1 year, because everybody cannot be measured on a month on month basis. So maybe on a quarterly basis or a 6 monthly basis, if you measure how much revenue or profitability rather, I think profitability is a better measure than revenues. So if you can measure, it puts a lot of clarity into the output or productivity of the individual, and then from there you can ramp up. As we said, like we have to increase the productivity from X to 2x or 3x or 4x. So that if you get a clarity as to how much value the individual or the department is giving, then they can always add value to it, saying that I can add that much value. and not everything is like increasing the targets by 5x. It is not translatable. It's not that I bring in profitability by 5x by increasing the revenue by 5x. So there are multiple measures in the whole process. You save on the cost part of it, you save on the employee team of it, part of it you can outsource, part of it you can retain on your own, part of it you have to prioritize, part of it you can convert into a medium term project or a short or a long term project. I think these are all small things which you can do to bring the SME into a productivity mode or a KPI mode. And I think it will be a very interesting task because it's all on a learning mode. Because the SME is just growing, it doesn't have a very well set pattern in the whole process. So if you can debate and discuss and bring a framework into the whole process and then ramp up the performance over a period of time, I think all will jump into the whole process because now they have clarity on the framework of the revenue that the organization is bringing and the targets that you are setting and how we can bring the target within the specified time. That would be a very interesting project for an SME because they will be doing it for the first time. I think these are the top level things that I can talk of, and of course it will come from ideation in terms of creativity. And I think everybody should open their heart out, discuss threadbare through their ideas, and also be recognized for that. I think while they talk their ideas, but they also to be recognized for their thought processes, for their contribution to the organization. I think we will generate a lot of interesting work in the organization and measure that out, and that would take the organization to a very different journey vis-a-vis a traditional growth model.
Definitely, because the thing is that total dynamics of the SME, small and medium enterprises, needs to be transformed. Because the way SME is doing business, particularly in India, I think that there is a lot. I mean, there is actually need. There is a need to be transformed. Because if we cannot transform the SME, probably it cannot be sustainable. See, all the organization we see, because once upon a time, all these organizations were SME. If you talk about the Google, if you talk about the Facebook, if you talk about Indian multinational like that Infosys or Wipro, they are all the SME once upon a time. But the vision, the kind of the means the process they applied in building the organization, basically by their owners or the founders, and that actually transformed the organization in a totally different direction. So I think there's a lots of room to work for the SME, and the kind of the model, kind of the things that we are propagating, basically the philosophies that we are propagating. I think there is the means we can actually help lot of the lot we can help the SMEs in improving their performance and improving the performance as well as their sustainability. So this is the kind of the thing I think that we can help a lot to the SMEs. We can offer a lot, help to the SMEs. So that's one point. And another point is that so you are into your organization means your organization is into thought leadership area. So the thought leadership you are cultivating the concept of the thought leadership and propagating the philosophies of the thought leadership. So give me some example that how can you help the organization to increase the productivity also, as well as means how can actually help the organization to sustainable and thrive. Basically, sustainability is the biggest problem for the SME. The kind of the organization or the small and medium organization we see, they basically face the problem of the sustainability, and they needs to be transformed. So, as a thought leader, means as a thought leader, how do you actually help them to transform? So that is my and means you means that your organization and your philosophy. How actually can you help them to transform? That is my final questions to
Right. I think it's a very interesting question. And I think the first thing that we would like the SME to do is to have a product or a service which is very unique in the market. Okay, which means that you add something more, and which means that you bring in something which is not there in the market or slightly changes the dynamics of the market. That being the starting point, I think more important is not to jump into entrepreneurship with a product which you may have got experience of that, but it's already available in the market. So until and unless you bring in something unique which changes the dynamics of the market, I think transformation is halfway through if your product is very unique in the market. Okay, there are so many examples that today we are seeing where things are very unique and they are changing the way things were being done before. That is the first step towards transforming an SME. Okay, so have a very strong product or a service in hand which is different from the market or doesn't exist in the market today. Secondly, what we would say is that as we say of productivity, obviously everybody has to add value to it. Also, keep the organization lean and measurable. Okay, so we have to have a smart application. Also, let us remember that today is a smart world. Okay, so we are digital, we are in the internet enabled, we are connected, which means that we are trackable. There are tracking mechanisms 24 by 7. These have already been achieved before. Okay, so these all things have to be incorporated in your product today. It cannot be a static product. It has to be a dynamic product or a traceable system going back to the level of the customer, which means that you have to have a direct understanding of what the customer gives in. Okay, so that puts a lot of what should I say? Uh, your productivity increases automatically if you are connected to the customer all the time or 24 by 7 in some way or the other. That doesn't mean that you have to poke your customer 24 by 7, but you are always connected. That means that through the app, the customer is able to reach out to you any time of the day and you can reach out to them. So productivity in the sense automatic, because these people, so you have the turnaround time of response to the customer as a measure. And but what we have seen in today in most of the not startups, but my own experience, I would say, uh, I think there is a gap in which the way the customer satisfaction is being done, which means that if you look at the productivity, that your customer complaints are closed, fine. But the way it has been closed vis-a-vis what the customer wanted, perhaps it's not the right thing. Because I remember there are a lot of things people say this is our policy. We cannot do anything about it. And if from the productivity point of view, it is very right because this is what their boundaries have been set and they say this is what your answer should be if the question is like this, but that does not satisfy the customer. So as long as your customer is not satisfied, your productivity measure cannot be uh, considered closed. At the same time, we also have to remember that the customer might want the moon and you cannot give the moon. Okay. So these are the small things or tweaks that we have to do. Also have to have a very robust business model, which is dynamic, agile, responsive, and also takes in fact the feedback of the customer, which is being used by the company in some way or the other, and allow the people to use also their discretion. Everything cannot be dictated by the organization. There has to be certain amount of dictation done by the organization. There's a certain amount of intuition or on the spot decision given by the organization people themselves, and that might also help the organization in the longer run. So productivity in traditional form may be output by input, but these are the small measures that can actually bring in that might, and the real form is to see how the customer feels satisfied by your service, by your product, and whether he buys a repeat product from you or not. I think that is a great measure to see whether the customer is coming back to me again and again. So the organization is dynamic, mobile, adjustable, and serving the customer with its product and services, but see that the customer comes back to you again and again. And once you have a business model that backs that, I think that automatically brings your productivity into the whole picture, because a repeat customer is definitely making you realize, giving you a signal that you are a productive organization in the hands of the customer. In today's competitive world, when there are so many choices to the customer today, for the customer to come back and be loyal to you, to establish a rapport, to come back for every shoe that they purchase, if they come back to you, for every pencil that they purchase, if they come back to you, I think that's a great measure of productivity, I would say, because you have won the customer, and that means your business model is perfect. So all the measures I think can be adjusted to it, but derive it from the customer's point of view, and your productivity measure will be fine. I think that's a good reality check, the way
Definitely.
productivity is being measured.
So that needs to be done. It's a kind of the reality check. Hope that this kind of the solution we can offer in the future to the SMEs to not only improve their productivity but also give them more sustainability. So from my point of view and from your point of view, this is a kind of the thing that they need to adopt on urgent basis. So today we'll wrap up our discussion. So thanks a lot of having throwing the light on this important matter, productivity, and also discuss your point of view point of view from thought leadership. So hopefully that we will continue our discussion in also the next week. So thanks a lot. So we'll wrap up our discussion here.
Thank you, everyone.